Story 1. We used to nug people's backpacks. This involved taking all their books out of their backpacks, flipping the pack inside out, replacing the books, and zipping the backpack shut. The results looked like a genetic chicken nugget. Some people's backpacks were so broken by it that flipping took almost no effort. We would sometimes sneak into people's classrooms that had a split lunch period and nug all 30 packs while they were gone at lunch. We called it burritoing. And someone did it to a football player who was having a hell of a time getting his steroid dosage right, and he went on a rampage in the middle of fourth period government. The wrestling coach in the next class over straight up dropped him. Story 2. The oddest trend that swept through our school like a whirlwind of eccentricity was the era of pencil spinning. Picture this: students meticulously perfecting the art of twirling their writing utensils between their fingers, as if auditioning for a circus act. It was a mesmerizing spectacle to behold during class, transforming the mundane task of note-taking into a performance art piece. The craze may have faded, but the memories of our pen-twirling prowess remain etched in the annals of school history. Story 3. There was a brief period in middle school in the mid-90s where a lot of boys had yo-yos for whatever reason. I was a bit baffled, to be honest. It's like I showed up to school one Monday and everyone had a yo-yo. And as peer pressure at that age goes, I begged my mom to get me one too, even though I had no real desire to play with one. I just didn't want to feel like the weird kid that didn't have one. I feel like that trend died out really quickly though. Story 4. Hands down, it was eraser shavings. We had this thing called eraser shavings, where you'd take erasers and rub them against those textured blue plastic school chairs. You probably know the ones. This was done in the open, then covertly, once the school caught on to it and discouraged the activity. We'd have at least half the class doing this all day, and at the end of the day, one kid would produce a large pencil box and go around collecting everyone's piles of eraser shavings. During the book fair, we discovered that there were these huge novelty erasers that shaved down really nice-like, and everyone in class bought them, to the point they sold out at the book fair. Cases upon cases, bankrolled by the rich kids and given out to the masses. For weeks and weeks, we ground down those erasers, until the kid with the pencil box was at capacity, and we had to have another kid with another pencil box step in. But soon that too was at capacity. So once more, another kid, another box. This went on until we had at least a dozen pencil boxes, each brimming with its own sort of colorful mixture, depending on the color of erasers being used. Each one held precariously shut by a flimsy latch and a few reluctant pieces of tape pilfered from the teacher's desk. At recess, we would meet in the corner of the lot and present the heaps of rubber shavings like drug lords eyeing fresh snow. It went on for the better part of the school year until one of the storage kid's boxes ruptured in his backpack, and his parents called the school. The crackdown was uproarious, kids being called out of class, ordered to turn their backpacks out. We traded off boxes at recess and lunchtime, keeping the admin guessing who was in possession. I once handed off my box to a friend, only to be called in at the end of lunch, and avoided a referral by a hair. More than one backpack was roughed up by a custodian, only to vomit forth its rubbery rainbow cash in voluminous plumes all over the office. The uncountable hours of children's toil dashed upon desks, papers, and carpet. The number of cases dwindled to 3 or 4 from our glory days of dozens, and the scuffed chairs, rendered smooth by endless hours of eraser shaving, cycled about classrooms until many grades later they only served as a memento to be pointed out and spoken of in hushed tones by the upperclassmen who once sat upon them, toiling away for hours to create our legacy. Story 5. The weirdest one for me was WWJD, What Would Jesus Do bracelets, which exploded in my 6th grade class, to the extent that non-Christian kids were getting them. As usual, there was a specific type that took off, which was woven thread with the letters woven into them in a second color. When I, also not a Christian, asked my mom to get me one so I would fit in with the trend, she got me a different kind, beaded, and I literally got mocked by a group at school for not having the right kind of Jesus bracelet, illustrating how much those kids actually considered what Jesus would do. Story 6. They painted the girls' bathroom when I was in 5th grade, and it became trendy to go into the bathroom to peel the paint. It came off in rubbery strips, which was very fun. I don't think the teachers used our bathroom, so I guess nobody noticed that we were destroying the new paint job until it was too late. I remember my friend whispering to me, "I'm going to peel paint. See if you can get excused in a few minutes so we can do it together." Bizarre trend. Story 7. It might not be the absolute weirdest, but I don't think there was any pre-internet trend that took over more quickly and completely than POGs. They were just collectible cardboard discs with pictures on them, and there was a game where you hit stacks of them with a plastic or metal slammer to win another person's POGs. I think it was literally a matter of weeks between when people started playing when they were at recess and when they had taken over so fully that kids were fighting about them. The school admin figured out that they were gambling with them, and they got banned. Story 8. I'll go first. My year used to always make the substitution teacher's day absolute hell. I'm sure it happened with other years too. It got so bad once that a sub just got up and walked out, and we never saw him again. Feels bad in hindsight, but I wasn't involved. But I also never found the lesson useful if it was covered by a random sub either, so it was just whatever. I hated whenever there was a substitute teacher, because my classmates would always take that as an opportunity to put on their worst behavior. Apparently, the class was so poorly behaved one time that when our regular teacher came in to check up on things at the end of the day, she found the substitute teacher crying. We got a class detention after school the next day and had to write an apology letter. Things like that happened often, where we would get detention for the way the class behaved with the substitute teacher the day before. Story 9. This is so embarrassing to admit. I just want to first mention that it wasn't just me who did this. It was an actual trend locally, and was going on for many years before my time, and probably quite a few years after. When I was in elementary school, it was considered cool to be in our local swim club. Not because swimming was cool, but because all the cool people were in the club. Probably because it cost quite a bit of money, and they were the only people who could afford it. So anyways, it was considered so cool to be a swimmer that we would all show up to school with wet hair to look like we just came from the morning practice. Not just damp hair like you got out of the shower 20 minutes ago, but like sopping wet hair with water running down your face just to really make it clear that you were just in the pool, and then basically leapt out, didn't dry off, and headed straight to school. I remember my mom dropping me off behind the school in the morning with my wet hair. Then I'd go over to the side of the school that had a garden faucet and stick my head under it and get it soaking wet. And then I'd walk around the front as though that's how wet it was when I got out of the car. We kept it wet throughout the day too by putting our head in the drinking fountain. What makes it worse is that we only had one community pool and the one swim club, so if you weren't in the swim club and hadn't been at morning practice, there was no way your hair could have been wet from being in the pool. Like, we weren't fooling anybody. In my hometown, it is cold and overcast pretty much year-round. Not one person has a pool of their own. There's no fancy gym with a pool, and obviously the biggest roadblock here was the fact that the people in the swim club knew we weren't in it, so the whole charade was completely pointless anyways. I also want to die of shame just a tiny bit for admitting this, but the swim club had these brand name jackets with the swim club logo embroidered on the back, and matching track pants. But the local sporting goods store sold a knockoff brand that looked identical, but obviously didn't have the swim club logo. So lots of us really went all out on the whole pretending to be in the swim club thing by wearing the matching clothes all the time, and also those Adidas slides with all the bumps on the sole. Except ours were not Adidas. I also carried a small duffel bag that presumably held my swim gear, but actually just had a bunch of socks and underwear I grabbed out of the clean clothes hamper one day and stuffed in. Plus my grandma's prescription goggles she used when she did Aquafit. Story 10. In middle school, Slap Butt Day, which turned into Slap Butt Week, then Slap Butt Month. Like the name suggests, people just go around slapping people's butts. I remember screaming at the top of my lungs at my friend because she did it to me. Nobody dared to slap my butt after that though. They were little weasels about it. They were like, she would like it if my girlfriend at the time slapped her instead. No, I wouldn't have. Nobody touches me without consent. Not then, not now. Story 11. In middle school, all the boys, myself included, played RuneScape. I'm talking literally at least a third, if not half, of every class. Fast forward 4 years to high school, where everyone is far more concerned with female attention, yet most of us were still addicted to RS. Dorks like me were strictly excluded from cliques in real life, while invited into them through the back door of playing the same game and needing as many people as possible for specific bosses and clan activities. Fast forward another 10 years to now. Did all the Kool-Aids end up working for the nerds? Of course not. Did my entire generation have a game that united us all as digitally equalized knights? You're damn right. Story 12. Yo-yos were really trendy in 6th and 7th grade for some reason. Having a cool yo-yo and being able to do tricks was a status symbol. All I had was a Duncan butterfly yo-yo, but I learned how to do some pretty cool tricks with it. Other kids had crazy light-up yo-yos with ball bearings and all sorts of crap in them. Wearing an oversized shirt and tucking it in only over your belt buckle was a thing too. And wearing a braided leather belt that was too long and letting the extra hang over. Jinkos were a trend that I luckily was just a little too young for, but my older brother had a pair and looked absolutely ridiculous, with a chain wallet to match. Even though he was what the kids called a prep back then. Moving on to high school. I went to a public high school, but there was some sort of religious revival, and prayer circles became a big thing. It was definitely trendy because all of the popular kids would carry teen Bibles around and pop up prayer circles everywhere. Before school, at lunch, after school, at sporting events, even at Sonic. Now that I think about it though, it probably had something to do with 9/11. Shortly after that is when all the religious stuff became trendy. Tamagotchi and Nanopets were big in 3rd and 4th grade, but they were kind of cool. The other stuff was weird. Story 13. It was a trend only the boys did, but they would nut tap each other throughout the day, and whoever could get in the last one before the end of the day was the winner. Also, I remember we played this weird game that if someone poked the inside of your palm, you had to keep that hand closed in a fist until you smacked someone's butt. Also, breaking each other's colored jelly bracelets for sexual acts that we were all too young to be doing anyway, so it was all just for laughs. Story 14. Weirdest non-harmful? Silly bands. Weirdest harmful? A song/game about Asian children that we would sing while pulling at our eyes. We were 7. We thought you had to be mean to be racist, and we were trying to be funny. It's bizarre to think about, because it shows how defining racism so simply causes the opposite effect of the desired outcome. All actions are fine if they don't fit under one definition sort of deal. They tried to simplify racism to kindergartners as being something only villains do, and it backfired pretty badly. It affirmed what we were doing was okay, and I still feel weird about it. Story 15. Grade school. The FEM test. This was mostly done by boys, and the test was to scratch the top of your hand with something sharp until the witness said to stop. If you stopped before that, you were deemed a femme. Most of the boys had horrific wounds on their hands, so the school sent letters home, and they started questioning any student who exhibited any signs of a hand wound to see if they participated in the FEM test. My younger sister, an avowed tomboy, was called into the principal's office twice for suspicion of a femtest wound. She actually scratched her hands while hiking down to the lake. My mother had to confirm that my sister had indeed not participated in the femtest. Kids are idiots. Story 16. We had a lot of weird ones very specific to my high school thinking back, and I never really thought about how weird they were until now. When I was in early high school, there was a trend among the girls involving these gola bags. Everyone had one, but it was a thing where you couldn't have one the same color as someone else unless you were close friends. Like, someone buying one which was a color someone already had was considered a huge insult. It was so weird, and I've never found any other school where this was a trend. It wasn't cool to have a backpack, only a satchel bag. If you did have a backpack, it had to be a fashionable one, with thin straps, not a regular backpack. And if you did have a backpack, you were supposed to wear it only on one shoulder. Wearing a backpack on both shoulders, as you're meant to, was considered uncool for whatever reason. My school had a uniform which included a blazer, and it was a thing, for some reason, that it was considered incredibly uncool to button up the blazer. Everyone always wore them open. You only made the mistake of buttoning it up on your first day, and then never again. No idea why that was a thing, but anyone who had their blazer buttoned up was considered a nerd and uncool. Story 17. One that comes to mind is someone writing someone else's name on the palm of your hand, along with a time on the top of your hand. If you looked at it before the time, you had to ask them out. Imagine being asked out because it was kind of a dare. I mean, I was always the one that everyone was grossed out by, and it's just kind of nauseating. Someone being forced to ask you out because it's a dare. Another one was the MASH, or whatever it was called. It had who your future wife or husband was, how many kids you would have, what your job would be, what type of house or car you would have, etc. But at least this one wasn't a, hey, you have to go ask them out now type deal. Story 18. I remember having strict dress codes for both boys and girls that were monitored very closely. Silly stuff, like no jeans, no sneakers or white socks, for boys. Dresses had to be no higher than knee length, girls. No low tops or tight dresses or tight sweaters, girls. Nothing over 2-inch heels, no t-shirts, must have a collar. No sunglasses, no long hair, boys, and combed, both. No smoking on school premises, no hoodies, no holding hands, or anything sexual. No talking in class, no screaming in the hallways, no entering a busy classroom without knocking and being invited in. No note passing. Must call teachers by Mr., Mrs., or Miss. And if you were caught not having your homework done, being sent to the principal's office. Story 19. Glue flip. Basically, you'd take a stick of glue, twist it all the way up, and throw it so that it would stick to the ceiling. For a few weeks, every ceiling in school was covered in glue sticks, until one day when one of those fell down, and a teacher stepped on the glue. Cue a school-wide witch hunt for those who started the trend. And when the two boys finally confessed, they had to pay for a longer ladder for the janitor so that he could safely remove all the glue from the ceiling. Story 20. In grade school, giving each other sissy tests by erasing the skin off the backs of each other's hand. The winner was whoever lasted the longest. We all walked around with big, oozing scabs on our hands. We called them sissy scars. At my first high school, rolling knee-high socks down to our ankles, with big, unlaced high tops and parachute pants. At my second high school, kids were stealing and wearing bowling shoes to school. The same kids also brought packed lunches and carefully saved Happy Meal boxes that they reused over and over. This was a country school, about an hour's drive to the nearest bowling alley or McD's. Story 21. Probably Extreme Team. Basically, Jackass-style stunts that 1, we filmed, so there's evidence of all of it. And 2, no safety precautions were ever taken. Roman candle fights in a public park, riding an enormous green bouncy ball all the way down a very steep hill to see who could hold on the longest. Also in that public park, swallowing dirty but live goldfish, and the last one to vomit is the winner. That was on the high school tennis court. 2-man off-roading. 2 guys in the driver's seat, one on the other's lap. The back guy was blindfolded and steering. The front guy gave directions for steering, while the back guy sat on his hands. This was also in the public park, navigating on the grass around the sports fields. I'm not sure how none of us were injured, but at least we had the sense to wear seatbelts. Snorkeling in the nasty pond at a Burger King at midnight. Hot sauce goggles. We only used Texas Pete, but still very stupid, and the second greatest pain I've ever felt. The 1.5 mile gallon challenge. Although this one was more fun and less dangerous. We each chugged a half gallon of whole milk and ran the mile right after. We attempted full gallons once, and no one could finish the entire gallon before vomiting. So we adjusted to halves. Yes, everyone threw up, but if you timed it just right, you could throw up on your best friend, often leading to them throwing up immediately after. How any of us survived adolescence is still a mystery. Story 1. In the first grade, we went to the harbor, and we were supposed to learn about boats, I think. The weekend before the trip, a whole hurricane came through, and destroyed the entire boardwalk. We still went. The outer edge of the hurricane was still scudding over. Everything was muddy and destroyed. Then we went to a museum about duck decoys, which are cool examples of folk art and all, but they did absolutely nothing for a 7-year-old. I'd also like to nominate my being left behind in a darkened room of the Natural History Museum in DC. I think it was a dinosaur display. It was so terrifying. The second time I was left behind, Air and Space Museum, I think, I was just like, shit, here we go again. Story 2. Movie theater field trip. Sounds pretty standard, right? We were going to miss school for a day and go see some movie in an empty theater before the doors officially opened to the public. It was going to be great. So we get to the theater and are escorted to the concession stand. We go to pull out our money to buy snacks, but are told that we're not allowed to buy our own snacks. No, we have to take what they've already prepared for us. What we get is a little kid's snack box, which includes what is probably half of a small popcorn, a small Pepsi, a fun-size M&Ms, and a freaking good and plenty. So everyone is pissed off already, but things are only going to get worse from here. We're led into the theater proper, which again is entirely empty because the place isn't open to the public yet. We start to walk up to the back of the theater when we're stopped by our teachers. We are told that we have to sit in the front rows. We have the entire theater to ourselves and could get the best seats in the house, but no, we have to sit in the front with our necks tilted back all the way just to see the screen. And then the lights go out and the movie starts, and the theater erupts into chaos. See, there's one other little problem I neglected to mention before. At no point were we told what movie we were going to see. Most of us didn't care at the time, since either way we were getting out of school. But once the movie started, we started to care. It looked to be some sort of 80s action cartoon movie. It heavily reminded me of He-Man, but I'm almost certain it wasn't actually He-Man. Keep in mind, we were middle schoolers in the early 2000s. There were any number of other more recent movies they could have shown us, but for some crazy reason, they decided that the best thing they could show a group of already angry middle schoolers was some 80s cartoon film, and not even something good like a Disney film. We basically rioted. There was screaming, there was food being thrown, and even after the teachers finally managed to calm everyone down, literally nobody watched the movie. We all just sat and talked with each other, completely ignoring it. Within 10 minutes of the start of the film, the teachers just gave up and let us do whatever we wanted. The whole thing was a disaster, and I have no idea what they were thinking with that field trip. Story 3. Fort Griffin in Albany, Texas. In the 7th grade, we took a Texas history class trip to the Civil War-era fort. The field trip itself was awesome. Lots of attractions and lectures about prairie life, Native American culture, etc. The first few hours were fine, despite my cough and scratchy throat. But as the day progressed, my throat became very sore. The kind of sore where you'd rather spit than feel the sting of swallowing. Lunchtime came, and I didn't want to eat and barely sipped a bit of soda from the pain. As the day continued, so did my illness. By about 1 p.m., it was clear this was some sort of flu. West Texas is still very hot in October, so of course the teachers wanted us to keep a water bottle and hydrate. But I can't. It hurts too much to drink. I'm queasy from the illness and not eating. I'm absolutely miserable, overheated, and tired. We gather up to watch the final presentation, a mock battle where they fire off cannons and stuff, but I don't see much of it because I have to go to a secluded area and throw up. Obviously, not much came out, but I did feel some relief. As we headed back to the buses, I decided the move was to chug like 3 bottles of water as fast as possible just to fill my gut. It's about a 45-minute drive back to the school, and of course, the air conditioner on the bus is crappy, so I have my window down for some fresh air. My assigned seat buddy was this super cute girl who I don't really know that well, so we don't talk much, but I'm also not feeling up to chatting. I'm focusing on my ever-shrinking esophagus and the urge to purge. Despite all my mental willpower, it wasn't enough. As 1.5 liters of water rapidly escapes my stomach, I try to just cover my mouth and hold it in. My hand causes the old spray nozzle effect, and I cover myself and my seatmate in hot water. And there's still about 10 more minutes till we get back to the campus. Story 4. Had the opportunity to do an overnight stay at a zoo once as a class trip, which included seeing all the animals after hours, feeding times, and getting to go into some of the enclosures to feed certain animals. Unfortunately, only 2 of us voted for that option. Everyone else voted to go see Jurassic Park 2 at the movies. 25 years later, I'm still bummed about not going to the zoo. Actually, I'm going to revise that. Worst field trip was a trip we took for a tourism class. We planned to do a high water rope course, abseiling, and whitewater rafting. We went whitewater rafting first, and the rest of the trip was canceled after a girl drowned. Several of us nearly drowned. Part of the class got swept away downstream and had to be rescued, while the rest of us had to pull our classmate out of the river and then continue down the river to get out. All the while suffering hypothermia due to being out there for hours, trying to get our classmate's body out while in soaking wet wetsuits. The rest of the day was spent smoking while trying to get warm and waiting to be interviewed by the cops. Second worst was 6 months later when our traumatized class was forced into high-speed jet boats in extremely low water levels, when none of us felt comfortable going anywhere near a boat yet. Tutors told us to suck it up, get on the boat, or we'd fail the year. Story 5. One of the local museums where I grew up and went to high school had this guy who can only be described as a complete boffin, who took us out to look at geographic features in our local area. The tour guide had a special ability to make even semi-interesting features like earthquake damage seem completely boring. The worst part is we had a speaker system on the bus, and he had it on full volume, so we were unable to talk amongst ourselves and disrupt his monotonous voice. The entire trip, the guide had a fixation on a feature called a truncated spur, essentially where a spur gets eroded by water, so the fronts look a bit triangular, and is evidence that the geography of the area was once sea level. It was interesting to learn at first, but he stopped at every single truncated spur and made us write down some bullshit about it and how old it is, etc. This was unaided by the fact that at 90% of our stops, we weren't able to leave the bus because of earthquake hazards. So we were trapped in this bus for 6 out of the 7 hours of the trip, unable to talk, while being forced to listen to this boring human being. There was one place called Cobb Cottage, where he stopped and told us a story about how he helps with the upkeep, and apparently he belonged to a group called the Cobb Cobblers, and essentially rubs horse and mud over old buildings to keep them standing. We weren't even able to go into said building because it was an earthquake risk. The best part about that entire trip was when we hopped out of the bus to go into a farmland area to get a good view of yet another truncated spur. While we were there, we were surrounded by cow which reeked, and the tour guide was like, "This is a nice spot for lunch." Worst thing is, 2 years later, we were taken by the same boring guy around another area for a local history tour. The area was pretty much right next to my house, and the guide stopped at the top of walkways to historic sites and talked over us for 30 minutes at a time and told us what we could see, even though the walkway down would only have taken 5 minutes. The day after that second trip, our teacher apologized and let us play Pictionary for the whole lesson. This was in high school, so we were all like 16 to 18 at the time, and well beyond wanting to participate in this kind of BS. Story 6. The field trip was fine, but what happened afterward was one of the worst things to happen, in hindsight. I was 10 years old when this took place. Went to a fort in elementary school, and I had just transferred to a new school. There were lots and lots of schools there that day, and I happened to see my old friends. broke away from my group to be with them instead. At the end of the day, I ended up getting on their bus without thinking, and my old school at the end of the day would drop kids off to an after-school center first, then take the others home. Now, I don't know why attendance wasn't taken or anything, but I got off with my best friend at a YMCA-type place. They took account of the children there and asked me why I was there because I was not on their roster. I said I was with my friend, and they then asked if my parents knew, and I answered no. Well, turns out that an hour later, a missing child report would go up on the local news channel with my photo. The staff at the center immediately called the police to tell them where I was. I was picked up by police and taken back to my school. My parents were going crazy at the fact that my teacher had lost me and didn't realize it until my babysitter, who normally picked me up, had asked where I was. Not comprehending the gravity of the situation at the time, I didn't know what the big deal was. Now, though, I realize how bad it was. I got into hella trouble with both my parents and the school, and I wasn't allowed to go on any other field trips for the rest of the school year. Okay, I know this is a seriously bad thing, but I think not being able to go on any more field trips for the rest of the year is a tad harsh of a punishment for a 10-year-old. You were with a friend and didn't realize the gravity of the situation. Story 7. In elementary school, we took a field trip to prison. I don't remember much, but it was very boring, and we did a lot of walking. I do, for whatever reason, remember my teacher saying, "It always breaks my heart whenever I see one of my previous students here." I also remember some kids were actually scared to even be there. Not sure who thought it was a good idea, but I'd rate it a 3 out of 10. Story 8. Army Academy. I wanted to be a soldier. Had a solid career path wherein I was going to nursing school first and then become an army medic. Plus side is if you enlist with a degree, you immediately become a ranked officer. So yeah, get in, learn all about it. Then they tell me I was too short to enlist. I stopped growing at 4'11", and the minimum height requirement was 5'2". I cried all the way home. Story 9. We visited a rainforest at night. It was actually really cool, but I had recently lost weight due to a bad case of pneumonia, so my pants were loose. I bent over to pick up my backpack and accidentally flashed everyone in the middle of a forest under a full moon. Someone pointed out my round, pale perfectly matched the moon, and I was called Moon Moon for the rest of the year. Story 10. I went to Memphis for an overnight trip in 5th grade. I caught a fever the night we got there and was deathly ill the entirety of the next day. I remember going to the Pink Palace and sitting on every single bench with my friends, waiting for everyone else to get through the exhibit. After that, we went to a stop on the Underground Railroad, where I almost certainly got my first migraine. Finally, on the bus home, I vomited all over one of the chaperones and on the bus floor. Story 11. We went to the museum. It was a bodies exhibit where they have actual human cadavers, and I remember 2 kids in my class fighting and knocking down a fetus jar. It didn't break, but our teacher was so pissed, she just ended our tour and argued with us all the way back to school. I had to go on one of those too. It was the weirdest experience of my life. Apparently, preserved human body parts can look quite delicious. I don't know why the bones looked very biscuit-like, and the meat looked, well, meaty. The fetus jar, unfortunately, reminded me of my grandmother's strawberry jam. The icing on the cake was that, when we left the museum, we saw an ambulance and medics treating some old dude who had passed out nearby. My classmate, who wanted to be a doctor, looked over and said something along the lines of, "Cool, a live exhibit." It was a time. Story 12. Rice Farm. We had to help with transplanting the rice seedlings, part of the community service and volunteer initiative. It started raining. A crab bit my little toe, fell into the mud. The lunch college provided was dry. Got a cold, but it was still pretty interesting, especially the mud fight. Story 13. Trip to the zoo. I've never been to the zoo before, and I've always wanted to go and see a lion. I was so excited. We got there and they said the lion was sick or some shit, and I said, "Can I go to the back and see him for just a second?" I had never seen one, and my teacher said no. Kids who I thought were my friends were laughing at me, and one of them said, "Get a book and look at one." Story 14. Freshman year of high school, a number of us toured ASU, Arizona State University. A bunch of us got lost due to highly conflicting information, which ended up involving temp police, a bunch of parents, and a teacher being suspended. He resigned a few days later. Long story short, different teachers were giving different times and locations to different groups of students. Some students, such as myself, stayed on campus. Other students just walked off and tried taking the bus back to our school. This got law enforcement involved, which in turn got parents involved, who had then threatened possible legal action. So the teacher who had organized it in the first place was suspended, pending an investigation. He quit instead. This also happened to me. It was an 8th grade field trip to the local high school, and the teacher we were with did not realize we were supposed to meet the other teachers and students for lunch. So we missed lunch, and all the teachers were arguing with the one we were with, and they almost called the cops. Interesting to say the least. Story 15. School trip to Ellis Island before it was restored in the 90s. It was the middle of winter, and we were so cold that the kids were crying. The holes in ceilings and walls had freezing rain pouring through them. Utter misery. When I relayed the story to a very old neighbor who actually went through Ellis Island in winter as a child, she said she had the same experience as I had, even leaky holes in the ceiling. Except for her, it was the best day of my life. Story 16. Overnight hike camping trip, divided into 4 groups for some reason. I was in the last group. I got hypothermia because my group got lost, and it was raining. And while everyone was soaked, apparently my body decided it should die first. We didn't go to the hospital or even a doctor. No nurse visit when we went back to school the next day either. Slept in a van with no food, didn't have breakfast because mom sent me with no money for it, and I was blamed for why the school wouldn't let outside overnights happen again for a few years. Thanks, MP. Story 17. When we graduated, my entire class was supposed to go to Disneyland on 4 buses. Halfway there, one of the buses breaks down. They did not account for the possibility of needing extra seats. I spent a good 8 hours sitting crisscrossed on a bus floor, with about 30 other kids also crammed onto the floor. People were triple seated. It was f***ed. Story 18. Go to an alternative high school, and every month or so we go on Leaving to Learns. One time, my class went to a local robotics place. It was pretty decent, but the employee that was giving the tour looked down at my stomach right as she said, "large." Later that same day, I volunteered to help rake an elderly couple's yard with some classmates from another grade. Before we raked the yard, however, the couple treated us to lunch, warmed up canned chili and hot dogs. Guess who got a way bigger bowl of chili than everyone else? The universe was telling me to lose some damn weight that day. Anyways, the elderly couple were really nice, but very country and very religious. Before we ate, we had to do a prayer circle. While we were eating, they were playing a harmonica cover of Amazing Grace. When we were done, they gave us each letters from God. I never thought I'd see my fellow foul-mouthed weed and vape-smoking classmates in a prayer circle. It was hilarious.